Hey there, welcome everybody. It's exciting right now because we've got Milton Walker from Intel with us, and this is cool because you're here to show us how to do something that a lot of people have heard about, don't necessarily know how to do, and you're going to show us how easy it really is. And what we're talking about is overclocking CPUs.
Exactly.
And Intel has actually just released some brand new Core CPUs that are designed for overclocking, essentially, right?
Yes, mainstream overclocking, and the new CPUs is really easy, and it's a great CPU, two great CPUs.
Okay, so first of all, what are the CPUs? What are these CPUs that are designed for people to overclock?
Okay, great. So it's all the new 2010 Core Intel microarchitecture, and the two CPUs are the i7 875K and the i5 655K, and the K refers to the ability to overclock.
Okay, and which one do we have in this system here?
We've got 875.
Okay, and this is a really sweet Systemax built system right here.
Yeah, that's a nice system.
This is really nice, and this is sort of going to be our bench for this today as we show this off. Now, overclocking, if you've never heard the term before, essentially means taking your processor that's set for a certain speed, and then pushing it beyond what it's sort of designed for.
Right.
Exactly. And so explain to me how this works.
So it's great because it's a little bit more than just the CPU. It's taking the whole system, the board, the CPU, the memory, all the components on the board, and it's basically, bringing them up a few, depending on what frequency you end up at, but it's upping the frequency, so you get more frequency and more performance out of that system.
Okay, and from what I understand, we have a couple different ways we're going to be showing people how to overclock here. There's one way which is really easy, and that's using the software that Intel has actually created specifically to do this.
Yep, the desktop control center.
And then there's another way that can maybe scare people a little bit, but this is how the serious geeks do it, and that's when you start tinkering with the BIOS. Right.
When you start going into text mode, you start getting down to the nitty-gritty. That's the more you have a little more control that way, but it's kind of the original way to overclock.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and jump right into the basics here. So what do people need to know if they've decided, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start overclocking things.
Right.
What do they need to know? What's the first thing to start with here as somebody decides to begin this beautiful journey towards overclocking?
Right, and that's a good question. So, at the very beginning, you want to look at your system for, first of all, what do you want to do? How, what kind of overclocking do you want to do with the 875 platform, or with this platform that we have here, which is based on the DP55KG board. That's the Intel motherboard, and we've got the 875 CPU. You kind of have to start out with the different components. Can my board overclock? Do I have the right BIOS on my board? You always want to make sure you have the latest BIOS, and that's probably the first thing that you want to think of when you get all your components together. Okay. So the other components that you want to think about are my CPU heatsink or my cooler. Right? I want to get something that can really take away the heat off of the CPU, because that's going to limit you in your overclocking if you don't have a good fan.
So as we push things further and as we overclock our PC, the CPU is going to generate more heat than it does currently.
The whole system is going to generate more heat. So you want to make sure, I've got good memory. I've got memory that supports, probably want something that supports XMP, extreme memory profile. That's going to allow you to, the manufacturer of the memory has kind of pre-set up some profiles for the memory that allow you to get certain frequencies and certain settings on the memory. So as you start overclocking things, this is what the memory manufacturer says will work. Okay. So that's one big component. Obviously, having the right CPU cooler, as I said, having the right board and the right BIOS, and kind of in general having the right platform to cool. So you want to have a good chassis. You want to have make sure you got enough airflow, and those are kind of the main things.
Okay, so making sure things stay cool is very important when you're doing this. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in and start showing people how to do this. All right, so we're going to start with the BIOS. We're going to show people how to overclock in the BIOS first here. Okay, all right, cool. So let's go ahead and show them that. So what we've got here is we've booted into the BIOS of this system, and I think most people have probably at some point booted into the BIOS. Many people haven't, though, and so it's one of those things where if you've never seen it before, it's just a barrage of terminology and numbers that a lot of people are not familiar with. And in order to get into the BIOS, it's different for every computer. It could be that you hit delete when you're booting up, or F2 or F8 or whatever. It could be different from manufacturer to manufacturer. But once we're in the BIOS, this is where we start overclocking, right?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So once we're in the BIOS, what's the next step? What does all this stuff mean? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, great question. So starting from the top, we've got the BIOS version of the board. That's very important. You want to make sure you're on the latest BIOS. Typically, that's the best place to be, latest BIOS.
Okay.
The next item down here is the processor type, and you can see this is the 875K SKU, and the base frequency is 2.93 gigahertz. There's some other general information here, but what I want to point out is the host clock frequency, otherwise known as the B clock or base clock. This is the frequency that sets every other frequency on the board. So typically, when you don't have an unlocked CPU, people modify the host clock frequency, and there's some good things about modifying that frequency, and then there's some bad things about it. Next down is the processor turbo speed, and this is the top speed that you'll see the 875 jump to when your processor's doing a bunch of stuff. The maximum frequency is 3.6. You've got your memory speed here, and then you've got some more memory information, and that's basically all the information that you'll see on the main page. Now, what we want to go into
now really quick, just to point something out, you said that the host clock frequency, when people don't have unlocked CPUs, that's usually what that's what they'll change, and that's what's so awesome about these new Intel Core processors that we're dealing with, is that they're unlocked, so you don't have to worry about necessarily messing with the host clock frequency. You can, but it also allows you to tinker with a lot of other settings,
exactly, right? So you can, the main thing that you can now modify are the multipliers in the CPU, and that's where you get, modifying your host clock frequency and your multipliers is going to get you the biggest bang, biggest performance improvement.
All right.
So let's jump into the performance tab here. And it's going to ask us some questions here, whether we want to...
And again, this is going to be located maybe in a different place for a lot of people, depending on the motherboard, right? But once you get into this portion, all the info is basically the same, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's different names for some things, but it's, exactly like you said, there's the same concepts.
All right, so let's overclock something. I want to see this. Come on.
All right, so just a couple of things real quick. You've got a couple of items up here. You got your watchdog, which allows you, if you screw something up or if you get it into such an unstable state, the CPU or the board will figure, hey, you've gotten into an unstable state, and we think we're rebooting. Obviously, something screwed up. Let's jump back to some default settings. So that's the fail-safe watchdog. Host frequency override. We've got this. It's all set up. It's all automatic. What you can see here is we've got the default settings on this column. We've got proposed settings, and we've got what's actually the system is actually set up running. So you can see they're all the same. They're all the default values. Let's go and change something.
Let's do it. I've tried this before. I changed things before, and then my computer wouldn't boot. And I'd take the battery out.
Let's do some manual stuff. So change the clock frequency override to manual.
All right. So what's our first step here? If we've decided we're going to start trying to push the speed up on our processor, where do you usually start?
So you want to start with the host clock frequency, your base clock, and what you can do is change a few things here. You can bring it up a few megahertz, and remember the base clock is the default frequency that generates the main clock. So everything else is based off of that 133 megahertz. So that means if I change that any frequency change on that, I'm changing things on the board. So that is all the PCI devices that are running on the board, all those frequencies are going to go up. So everything, it touches everything. So that's the main thing. That's why it's not always best to just use B clock or host clock frequency to overclock.
Okay.
So let's go and let's see. We can bring this up a little bit. Whoops. Let's bring this up. I'll say. Let's just bring it up a little bit. We won't get too extreme.
So when you're doing this, but this is the way you want to do it, right? You want to start making minor adjustments, pushing things up a little bit, see if it works, a little bit more, see if it works, until you sort of figure out what the max you can reach with your system is, right?
Exactly. So you'll notice that as we move the frequency up, you can see the effects of the proposed new configuration start to change here. So I brought up the frequency from 133 megahertz to 136, and you can see the turbo boost frequency went up from 3.60 to 3.68. So it's not a huge amount of overclocking, but that's one of the effects. Also, you see that since this base clock runs, connects to everything, you can see the memory frequency went up.
Okay.
Right, so we went from 1066 to 1091, as well as the uncore speed and a couple of other things have changed and kind of in the background, PCI and a bunch of other stuff.
All right.
So what do we want to do from here? Let's go to, let's save this.
Okay.
So we changed our B clock.
So once you save it, the computer's going to go ahead.
It's going to boot, and it's going to boot into that new proposed configuration, and then we'll go back into the BIOS, and we'll see if it actually took.
Okay. Now, and again, this is the process, right? Like if you're playing on
iterative process.
Right. So if you're playing on overclocking your system, plan on rebooting it a bunch of times because you really
doing it the hard way.
Yeah, because essentially, like you want to, like every time you make a minor change, you want to reboot it and make sure your system's still going to work.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. All right. So let's go in and see if it's active. Right, so now you can see we proposed a 136 megahertz change. It's active. We're overclocking right now.
Yeah!
We didn't do a whole bunch of overclocking.
Yes, Mills.
We are overclocking.
All right. Okay. Now we're getting to business. All right, so now we pushed up just a few megahertz. We squeezed a few more megahertz out of it. So now what do we start doing? Is it time to start multiplying?
Right, so we can go and change the core multiplier frequency,
okay,
the CPU frequency, and then, the way that you really want to do this is you want to disable all of the hardware, right? That's one of the things that you want to do is go and turn off like audio and turn off. We didn't do any of that stuff.
Okay.
Really, if you're going to do it really hardcore, you want to go and disable all those extra, parallel port, serial port, turn all that stuff off, and then go and do your overclocking, and then jump back and turn all that stuff back on. All right, so let's see here. All right, so what I did was I jumped into the processor override screen, and that's just, in this particular BIOS, you scroll down to the processor, and then there's another setting, another screen that brings up processor settings. So we've got a couple of things here. We've got there's two components to this when you're overclocking a CPU. You've got the frequency and you've got the voltage.
Okay.
So as you change the frequency, there's going to be potentially some necessity to change the voltage that you're delivering to that CPU. Typically, when you're going with a higher frequency, you may need to increase the voltage. So we're not going to do a whole bunch of super. Well, maybe we will. Maybe we'll get into, maybe we'll try to get into some extreme overclocking here.
All right.
Let's see. The maximum non-turbo ratio right now is set at 22, and this is something that would be locked if we weren't using the 875K CPU.
Okay.
So right now we can go and change this.
So what does that mean? What is the non-turbo ratio?
So basically, what the maximum non-turbo ratio is the multiplier from the base clock frequency to get to the CPU unclocked frequency. So if I multiply 133 by 22, I should get 2.93 gigahertz. That's what that means.
Okay.
All right. So we can go and change that. I didn't change it. We can go and change that to, let's see, I think maybe the top end is, no, that's not right. Okay, here we go. So 22 is, so the base frequency is 2.93. That's the max you're going to get here.
Okay.
The thing that we're going to change is the 4-core ratio, which is going to be the turbo frequency.
Okay.
So we should be able to go to 30, I think, here. Oh, maybe we can go higher than 30. Let's see. How high can we go?
All the way up to 40.
I don't know if we're going to make 40.
Now, if you do 40,
So it's going to be 133 times 40, and that's going to be the top end turbo frequency, which
so that allows your system to really push it way, and chances are that probably might not work, right?
Right, and this system, we're not really set up to push it as high as probably we could go, because we don't have liquid cooling, we don't have some things that really hardcore overclockers, a lot of your guys in your audience who've done overclocking before and pushed it to the limits are probably using something like liquid cooling. So let's do something maybe not too conservative, but let's try, let's try 28. So that would, I don't know if we have any.
So we're multiplying 133 by 28, right?
To get our top turbo frequency.
All right.
All right. So let's save this.
And now it's going to reboot.
And we can go back into the main BIOS screen, and it'll give us what what frequency we're actually running at.
Okay.
If it comes back.
All right. It sounds like it's booting. So you may not have pushed it too far already.
I don't think we pushed it that far.
All right. So now we see what that resulted in, right? So now by increasing that multiplier that you just increased, now we get to see where we currently stand. Right. And so it says what, this is a 2.93 gigahertz processor. Right. And now we're looking at, now the high speed.
The base frequency is still the same because we didn't change the base frequency multiplier.
Right.
But now we've got the turbo frequency multiplier at 3.82.
Okay.
So we brought it up from what, 3.6, I think. And if we want to get some more information here, we can go into performance. Go into performance, and we can see exactly what we've done. We've gone from the default, which is 3.6, and by changing the max core max multiplier to 28 from 27 to 28, we're now at a 3.82 gigahertz.
So before we did this, under a heavy load, this computer would have maxed out at 3.6 gigahertz.
Exactly.
Now, under a heavy load, the PC will max out at 3.82.
Right. Exactly.
So that could be beneficial to somebody who's playing games or somebody who's rendering video on their system. Like that is going to give you a bit of a bump there.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this is awesome. And the thing about it is when we went into CPU, and I'll jump back into CPU here. You can see the way I set up the multipliers. You can basically change it per core.
Okay.
So now what it's saying here is that with all 4 of my cores enabled, I can get to that 3.9. What was it? 3.92. 3.92. And previously it was only for 4 cores. I believe it only went up to 3.2. With 1 core, it goes up to 3.6.
Okay.
So what you've just done was spread out the number of threads that you can run at that higher frequency.
Gotcha.
From the default. So you're really getting a lot more performance out of this 875K than you would in its kind of the sister processor, which is the 870.
Okay.
So yeah, you're getting a lot of performance.
All right, right on. So once you start pushing up that number, is there anything else you need to do to keep overclocking, or is that it?
No.
Okay, I mean, so now we've done this, right? Now I'm hungry for power, right,
okay.
Milton? I want more.
Right. Power corrupts. Right?
Yeah,
Absolute
it does.
Power corrupts.
It does. And now I want it. Now I want the power. What's next?
So the next thing you want to do is start with the memory.
Okay.
What we've done, because we already changed the base clock from 133 to 136, we already brought the memory frequency up a little bit. So you'll notice that what we didn't change was any of the memory multipliers. So there's a couple of things, and they make it a little easier to do memory overclocking because of the fact that the memory manufacturers set up profiles within, if it's an XMP type memory, they set up memory profiles with the kind of the overclock settings for you.
Okay.
So what we can do here is, let's go and see. We'll change this to manual.
See, this is what freaks me out, Milton. This right here. This freaks me out. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I look at this and I think I'm making a mistake by being in here. I'm somewhere I'm not supposed to be.
The memory is interesting because, you know, obviously there's a lot of different settings. There's a lot of timing settings with respect to memory, and that's what all these timing settings are. You know, different settings for you know, different read settings, different refresh settings. There's frankly a lot of stuff in here, and you can get pretty in depth when you're doing memory overclocking. The XMP profiles, that whole definition of that XMP structure was set up to make it a little easier. Now, I'm not sure we're using XMP memory here, but because what would happen is you would see another menu that would show up as XMP profiles, and I'm not seeing that now.
Okay.
But what we can do is we can go in and manually do some overclocking and change the multiplier.
So if you buy memory for your PC that has these memory profiles built into it, it makes it overclocking your memory significantly easier.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Let's see here. We'll go and change the multiplier here. We'll do 1363. So this is going to overclock our memory. It's going to change the multiplier, the actual memory multiplier, from 8 to 10.
Okay.
So we're going to get a pretty decent bump in speed, and it's going to change some of the, let's see, one of the things you want to make sure with memory, one of the important things to make sure that you're doing, or that you at least look at when you're overclocking memory, is the memory voltage.
Okay. And you're saying just like the CPU, as you increase the frequency,
you may need to
increase the voltage, and when you increase the voltage, that also increases your heat, right?
Exactly.
So if
you're back to cooling,
right? So if you're going to be overclocking your memory, you got to make sure that your memory is designed to handle that heat, to be cooled. Maybe have a fan, have some heat sinks on there. It needs to be. You have to be prepared for your memory to get pretty hot when you start doing this.
Right, and you have to look at it from a system perspective. So if you've got a decent chassis that's got a lot of airflow, a lot of cooling, a lot of fans, you should be in pretty good shape.
All right,
then looking, XMP memory and looking at that. So, the default here for the uncore memory voltage is 1.1, and I think that's pretty good. We may need to bump that up, but I'm not going to change it right now. So I'm going to leave it as we have it, and see if we can reboot and get back into the system.
All right. So as you're rebooting, so now what we've done is we have increased essentially we've increased the maximum speed of the computer.
Memory. Right.
And then we went ahead and we increased the maximum speed of the memory. Increased it from about 1,000 megahertz to about, what was it, 1,300 megahertz, 1363.
Yeah.
And so now what we're doing is we're checking to see if the memory setting, the voltage setting for that memory is going to work or not.
Right. So we'll see if it reboots. It's rebooting.
Okay.
Now, the thing that we haven't done yet is we haven't checked the stability of the system. So we haven't really run anything to kind of test and see if the system likes running at that speed.
So it is possible. So if it boots into the BIOS, that's just sort of your starting point.
Right.
You want to then move on to putting the system under some kind of load to make sure it can handle it.
Right. Because remember, we're still running. If it's not doing anything, we're still running at the base frequency.
Okay.
Right. So once we start putting it under some stress, it'll bump up, and especially the processor will bump up into the turbo frequency. So we'll start getting up towards 3.82. So it looks like it took the memory speed increase. So we've got 1366 megahertz.
So now, without spending any more money, we've increased the speed of the processor and the speed of our memory.
Exactly.
And haven't spent $1.
Not spend $1 over the original or over our configuration.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's jump out of here.
Okay.
And then let the system boot into the OS and see if we can get it to boot.
Okay, so that's your next step. So really, essentially, the name of the game here is tinkering, right? Like that's the name of the game. Like you want to tinker with this stuff as much as possible until it breaks.
And
then once it breaks, back off.
And then you can back off a little bit, and then you can kind of push back up to the limit. Right?
Okay.
And then you can start. Once you get into maybe we've broken it. I don't know. Let's see.
Is it broken? No, it's not broken yet.
It's not broken yet. We're working.
Yeah. So usually if I have anything to do with it, if I'm sitting here, it's usually broken, essentially. But we're looking good. So you have, I spoke too soon. So this is the sign, right?
This is a sign that you pushed it a little bit too far.
Okay, so what do you think was pushed too far? Do you think it was the memory, or do you think it was the CPU?
I think it was the memory voltage. I might have needed to bring up the memory voltage.
Okay.
So we'll go back and we'll do that, and then we'll bring it back into the
That's going to be that's the next thing that we try here. All right. All right, so we just got the blue screen of death, right? Which of course is all part of the whole ordeal, right? If you're not seeing the blue screen and you're overclocking,
you're not working hard.
You're not doing it right. All right. So you've made a few more changes here. We backed it down a little bit, so we're going to try one more time here to boot it up, right? So let's go ahead and give it one more shot. So we've got the processor speed pumped up just a little bit. We brought the memory back down because, and again, like you were saying, it's a lot more difficult to overclock that memory when you don't have memory that has the XMP, the extreme memory profile, right?
Exactly.
So it's important to look at if you're thinking about building a PC that you're gonna be overclocking. It's gonna make your life a lot easier to get XMP profile memory, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
So here we go. We're going into Windows here, and we're going to hope that it doesn't blue screen again because if it does, we're going to have to ask you to leave. All right. So now, once we have it in here, and once we get it to boot, then you know you're on your way, right? And then the next step maybe would be to run a utility that stresses the computer out, that maxes things to make sure that it's stable.
Super Pi, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we successfully overclocked using the BIOS, which takes a little while. It's a little bit complicated. It's a little bit, but it's also, like you said, it teaches you a lot about the way your PC works, and it really gives you a lot of good knowledge about this stuff. But there's an easier way to do this, and we're going to show you that coming up here in a separate video designed specifically to show you how to use this software that's going to allow you to bypass all of that stuff and go straight to overclocking.
Do it the easy way.
Do it the easy way. We're cheating.
It's kind of.
We're going to cheat in the next video coming up here in a second.